Stephen joined the MBTA as general manager on January 1st of this year, but he's no stranger to the T. He was interim GM in 2017. He served as vice chair of the Fiscal and Management Control Board, and he knows what he's getting into, the challenges of turning around a transit system that has suffered from decades of underinvestment and neglect. And I guess someone might ask you, Stephen, why take this job to begin with?
It's a privilege to have this job. I believe in the mission of the T. I know how important it is to this region, and it's a privilege to have this. It's a great responsibility, and I'm looking forward to providing a safer, more reliable T for this region.
Well, you also take the T to work, so you share in some of the frustrations that commuters feel as well. Let's start with the Orange Line cars. And the reason I start with that is because those new cars, which debuted in August and then in September, were the first real visible sign of a turnaround for the T. Beautiful new cars, people were riding them, enjoying them. And then just weeks into the introduction of those cars, we had a problem with the doors. And now, are they back in service, or when will they be in service?
We are working to get them back in service. We're expecting to have at least one train set back in service next week. We are going to be absorbing 404 new vehicles across the Orange and Red Line over the next 3 years. So there's going to be hiccups. We learn from each one of these things, and then it allows us, as we produce more cars, to make sure that problem doesn't happen again. So there are going to be hiccups as we go, but we are on a trajectory to replace all the cars on the Red and Orange Line and also add to the number of cars so we can provide additional service.
But the Orange Line cars were delayed for several months. They went through several months of testing, so some might ask, why wasn't this problem seen before now?
Well, we surely wish it had been seen before now. It had gone through 1 million cycles of testing, and this problem hadn't arisen. And there's certain things that will arise over time, and we work to fix them and obviously make sure that the problem doesn't happen as we've only got 12 cars in service. So we've got another, 396 to go. So we want to make sure that we fix all those problems.
Let's turn to the Red Line derailment back in June, kind of a perfect storm of an accident for the MBTA. Not only revealing problems with the aging equipment, but the signal and power system and things that were destroyed with it. And it really was a turning point, I think, for the T in terms of going forward, how it was going to address repairing the infrastructure, wasn't it?
Yes, following that, I think we have been approaching capital and safety and capital investment with a sense of urgency, and I think that just, we knew we had to redouble our efforts, and we have embarked on the safety investment and capital acceleration plan to get more work done faster, and one of the outgrowths of that is we're going to be seeing more diversions this fall so that we can get more work done more quickly.
Now we're going to talk about those diversions for a few minutes because they are going to disrupt travel patterns for people on the weekends. They already have started to do that. And it's going to be affecting the green, the orange, and the red lines eventually. Now, Emily Chariot, assistant producer here at WGBH News, took one of the bus shuttles that are replacing some of the green line service while that's under repair, and she prepared this video for us.
I'm WGBH's Emily Chariot, and I'm here at the Newton Highlands T-stop on the Green Line. To speed up the repairs of the T, the MBTA recently rolled out a series of weekend and weeknight closures on the red, orange, and green lines. Shuttle buses will replace all trains in the affected areas. But disruptions are already starting to happen on the D-line trains, as the T has been replaced with shuttle buses from Newton Highlands all the way to Kenmore Station, and riders are already starting to feel it. How have these closures impacted your commute?
It's been a lot more on Uber now.
because it's going to be like the construction or whatever they're doing is year long, it makes it less convenient, more T, and those who take the T, they want to get home, if they're coming from after work or from wherever they're coming from.
But there aren't any alternatives. Bostonians and people in the surrounding towns really rely on the T to be reliable. So it's a big disruption.
So taking the T from Newton Highlands to Kenmore roughly takes about 25 minutes according to Google Maps. But taking the bus, we're not really sure how long that's going to take. So we're going to time it and see where it takes us. 25 minutes into this bus ride, and we're only about halfway there. It's 10 o'clock on a Monday night. I only have to do this for work, but I can't imagine doing this, trying to get home on a weeknight. It's not as comfortable as the T. You're going through the Newton area that's very hilly, has winding roads, you're being jostled around on the bus, and to do it for what's probably going to be about 45 minutes, it's not fun. Thank you.
Take care.
Now, if the Citgo sign didn't already give it away, we are officially in Kenmore Square. Now, the ride took about 40 minutes long, which isn't that bad, but when you're used to only a 25-minute T ride, that extra 15 minutes can feel like a lot. And so these T closures on the D line are set to go throughout the end of the year. And so D line riders now have to ask themselves, how long are they willing to put up with this?
That's Emily Sherrio taking the bus shuttle, and as you could tell, it took longer. It was disruptive. What is the feedback you've been getting from people?
I think we hear a lot of that, and I think we acknowledge that the bus shuttles do take longer, and they are less convenient than the subway service. We're also hearing from people that it's worth it. You can see the improvement, on the D line. You see the improvement in the new track bed, the new rail, the improved intersection and the interchanges. That this is necessary work for the T to be reliable and to provide the type of service we want to provide our customers. So obviously there's frustration that everything takes longer, and she noted also that it was less comfortable, but it's also really important work for us to get done.
Is there evidence that it is in fact accelerating the repairs?
Yes, the diversions absolutely allow us to get a lot more repairs done and get them more quickly. We are pulling in kind of the dates of when we thought we'd get projects done, because if you just, on the most simple level, if you think about the work window overnight, where it may take 2 or 3 hours to mobilize, 2 or 3 hours to work, 2 or 3 hours to demobilize, if you're doing a diversion over a weekend, that 2 to 3 hours of mobilization, 2 to 3 hours of demobilization only happens once, and then you've got, depending on your time frame, a 40 to 50 hour window where you can work continuously. So it makes a big difference.
Now, we do have some information for people in terms of these closures. First of all, beginning with the Green Line, we have some slides showing when these closures will take place. Do you want to describe them?
Sure. There'll be closures on the B line, and those will be intermittent. The first one is going to happen towards the last weekend in October, first weekend in November, and then the weekend of November 16th, and the weekend of November 23rd on the B line, where there'll be bus shuttles between BC and Babcock Street.
And then we were already beginning with closures on the Orange Line, but they will be expanded.
Yes. The Orange Line, we had in the month of September, we had closures from Ruggles to Forest Hills on the Orange Line. We're going to have our first major closure downtown on the Orange Line starting this weekend and going through the weekend of November 9th. And that is going to be a closure from Sullivan Square all the way to Tufts, which is a pretty significant closure. Part of the reason why it has to be that significant is not only are we improving some of the stations in the core, but we are replacing track in the core. And you can't bring track and other construction materials up and down the stairs at Downtown Crossing, for instance. You've got to bring it in from a surface entrance. So the surface entrance we can access the closest ones are at Sullivan. So you've got to do a pretty extensive closure for us to be able to do that type of work.
And then, of course, we have the Red Line closures, and they'll be taking place later in November, is it?
Yes, there'll be 2 closures in November, the weekend of November 16th and the weekend of November 23rd. We will skip the weekend most adjacent to Thanksgiving, and then we'll do the first 2 weekends in December.
Now, these closures are going to disrupt the traveling for hundreds of thousands of riders. Have they been well informed about what alternatives there will be?
We have done an extensive campaign both on social media and within the stations, not only physical signs, electronic signs within the stations, in-station announcements. We will also have a full deployment on these weekends of MBTA station staff as well as MBTA transit ambassadors to direct people where they need to go, as well as extensive signage in all of the affected stations.
Now, as I understand it, these closures are unprecedented.
To my knowledge, yes, the T has never done closures on this scale, and this is something we intend to learn from. This is an experience that we're going to learn. If we have issues, we will adjust, and we are also looking prospectively down the road, potentially learning from this experience. What is the type of safety investment and capital acceleration work that we could do in 2020 as well?
Now, does this mean that you might have closures other than just on weekends?
It is something we're exploring. It is not something we are going to do this fall, but it is something we are exploring for 2020. We'll learn from this experience, and we'll also have more lead time to think about what would be the most effective diversion, and also let folks know far in advance so that they can plan for it as well.
Okay, we're Lunch Hour Live is the name of the program. We're on Facebook Live and Twitter. I'm Bob C., along with Stephen Poftak, General Manager of the MBTA. And we're open to your questions as well here in the studio at BPL and also online. Send us your questions for Mr. Poftak. We'll be happy to put them to him. A lot of people just express so much frustration about when the system is going to be fixed. What's your response to that?
You know, I understand the frustration. I took the Orange Line in today, and I rode in a hot car where the air conditioning wasn't working. So I understand the frustration. One of our challenges is how can we make these investments in reliability and safety? How can we make them faster? And part of doing that faster is doing these types of diversions. Our challenge is there's a certain level where the diversion becomes so intrusive that you reach sort of a tipping point, and I think we're trying to think about how far that is. We are working to accelerate the pace of investment, but it is a big system. It is a multi-billion-dollar investment plan that is going to take some time for us to effectively implement.
Now, we've been talking about the capital expenditures, improving the system. Do you have enough money to operate the system adequately?
Yes, we have gotten to the point where we run a modest structural deficit, but it is covered from an appropriation from the legislature. In fact, we've been able to make investments in additional service over the past few years. We've added 45 bus operators in off-peak hours, so that we can actually provide additional service. On the commuter rail, the MBTA runs 10,000 more trips per year than it did in 2014. So we do have adequate funding to run the service, and in fact, we've been able to add service enhancements over time.
Now, I know one of the things you've been doing is cleaning up stations. The Brightening Campaign, it's called.
Yes.
And I remember one of the Fiscal Control Board members, Monica Tibbett, brought this up months ago about the experience that people have walking into dirty stations where the lights don't work, where the signage is poor. So you are making an attempt to correct that.
Yes, we have invested across the system in station, not only, and there's sort of different gradients of it. Some of it is just station cleaning, power washing the stations, fixing things like tiles that are broken, and part of what we're doing with some of these station closures is, and if you've been in and out of Park Street recently, you've seen how we put in new aluminum stairs, which is a significant upgrade over kind of the cement and plastic insert stairs that we had before. So we're also doing those types of modernization. We're going to be doing upgrades to lighting as well, and painting of the stations. So I know some of the stations are not well lit; they're somewhat dingy. So the new lighting should address that. We want customers to have a good experience on the T, so that's why we're investing in station improvements.
Where does the money come from to run the T?
Money to run the T comes from a variety of sources. The bulk of it comes from a penny of the sales tax, which is over $1 billion in funding for the T. We get about $200 million in assessments on the cities and towns that are in the service area. We get roughly $700 million from our riders in the form of fares. We also get support. We get support from the state, and the T also generates a little under $100 million of its own revenue from things like advertising and parking. So it is, that is an area where we're always looking to improve. How can we generate more of our own revenue?
Let's talk about fares. This past July, we had a 6% fare increase go into effect after quite a contentious hearing. I remember you sitting there in Boston for about 3 hours one night listening to one person after another denounce the T for having the audacity to raise fares when service was so poor. Are we going to see another fare increase in a couple of years to continue to fund the T?
I think it is something we will look at. It was envisioned in the legislation that caps our ability to raise fares. It was envisioned that fare increases would be periodic and modest, and that's what we had. That's what we've done. I believe it was 2.5 or 3 years since the previous fare increase, and we ended up raising fares, if memory serves, just under 6%. The idea was to avoid a situation many years ago where the T hadn't raised fares for a while and then came out with a very dramatic fare increase in the double digits. Fares are an important part of the support for the T, and I think that is something we will look at on a periodic basis. But in general, I think the principle that fare increases should be modest and periodic is a sound one.
We've heard calls for a low-income fare, something that is lower in cost for many people in the inner city. We've heard about reduced fares for reverse commuters to try to fill empty trains. Are we going to see more flexibility in fares in the future?
We're currently doing a pilot with reverse commuting fares at half price on the Foxborough line when it starts. So I'd like to see the results of that. We're also in the process of doing a study on means-tested fares, which would be a low-income fare. I think some important principles to think about as we think about that is, what is the source of the subsidy? The T is not in a position to subsidize any sort of large-scale low-income fare program, but that doesn't mean there aren't other entities that could potentially subsidize it. The other important thing is that we would have to piggyback on someone else's income verification process. The T, I don't think the T is in a position to be verifying, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers' income. I don't think that's a realistic expectation of the T.
Can you tell us about the status of the automated fare collection system, which was supposed to be rolled out this coming year?
Sure. We are still working with our vendor to determine the timing of that. I think not inconsistent with a couple other major systems across the country. There have been challenges around technology development and the timeline around implementation. But it is, it is something that we have promised to our customers, and we'd like to get that program. We'd like to get that program out there as soon as we can. I think we're also looking at, is there something we can do in the very near term in terms of enhancing our current fare collection system to deliver some of the features that we hope to see in the longer term.
Because we do also hear about fares not being collected, machines not working, money that's essentially left on the table by the T every year, millions of dollars worth. Is this new system designed to try to recoup some of that lost revenue?
The new system would help us do that. I think one of the things, again, we're doing in more of the short term is in calendar year 2020, we will be installing fare gates at Back Bay, North Station, and South Station, because the place I hear the most about fare non-collection, and I make a distinction between fare non-collection and intentional fare evasion. The place where I hear about it most is from folks on the commuter rail. So that will allow us to collect or ensure that we collect the bulk of the fares on the commuter rail.
I have several questions here from our audience and on Twitter about accessibility. You mentioned the Park Street Station. Someone says it's a mess. There are disability issues, bad connections to other lines, lighting. We also saw a story in the Globe about the lack of elevator repairs. What about the status of accessibility improvements?
Accessibility is very important to us, and I think I guess I'm not aware if there's a specific issue at Park Street, but I will have that looked into. I would note that Park Street is one of the stations that we're going to be doing station improvements at. during the diversions. To specifically talk about the issue of elevators, MBTA has very specific demands on it. We're essentially running outdoor elevators all over the system. So there is a significant engineering burden to designing those, getting the materials, and then getting them built in frequently outdoor locations. That said, the point is well taken that we need to accelerate how we are fixing our elevators. We expect to have the Andrew Square elevator operational this month, and we are also working to accelerate the timeline of the elevators at Harvard and Central Square. I think if I could go back in time to sort of when these projects were all phased out, surely we shouldn't have done the Harvard and Central Square elevators right on simultaneously, because it is a significant burden on our customers who depend on those elevators. So the point is well taken that we need to be more thoughtful about how we plan these projects. We need to deal with the fact that we have long lead times, and we need to provide the level of accessibility that our customers deserve.
Let's turn to buses, which I know is a big issue. At the last Fiscal Control Board meeting, there was quite a bit of criticism of the Better Bus project, saying that it wasn't happening, like so many other things, fast enough, especially when it comes to designated bus lanes, which would improve bus service tremendously. Where are we at with providing better access for buses throughout the city?
We have identified over 14 miles of priority bus lanes, and we are in the process of working with municipalities to get those lanes set aside and then set them up, design them, plan them, execute on them so that they can be available for buses. I think there is a sense of frustration that we'd love for this project to go faster. I think there's a level of complexity here in that we are dealing with city streets. We're dealing with a bunch of different stakeholder groups. I am hopeful that as more and more dedicated bus lanes are out there and they become normalized. I took one this morning on Washington Street in Roslindale, and it's a wonderful thing. It saves, the data says we save 3 to 4 minutes. My lived experience is that we save something significantly more than that, and maybe it's just not the being in stop-and-go traffic. There's a sort of a lack of mental strain or something, but it is, they work really well, and I'm hopeful that as people see it and experience it and it becomes more normalized, that we'll have more of them.
Are you getting the cooperation you need from municipalities to do it?
I think in many cases we are. We're getting lots of a very enthusiastic response. We'd always love more. And again, the MBTA stands ready to be a partner with municipalities. We have capital funding available to do the initial design, painting, whatever construction work needs to be done. So the MBTA stands ready to be a partner to get more of these bus lanes in place.
Now, Craig Lamalt, our environmental reporter at WGBH, just did a 3-part series on air pollution. And we know transportation is a leading cause of air pollution. What is being done at the T to try to lessen that kind of pollution and to electrify more vehicles?
At our facilities, we have an extensive plan where we've been converting to more energy efficient equipment like LED light bulbs and whatnot. In terms of vehicles themselves, we have bought our last diesel-only bus. We are now buying diesel-electric hybrids. We are currently testing a couple different electric bus technologies. We have 5 battery electric buses that we are using in service, and we're trying to do a 4-season test to figure out how well these buses work. Are they going to meet our needs? Right now, the MBTA has a bus fleet of 1,000 buses, and we need about 789 of those buses every day to run service. I think we need to get to a point where the move to electric buses is going to require a technology that is available at scale, that runs in cold places like Boston and runs consistently. And then the other piece that dovetails with it is the MBTA needs to build bus maintenance facilities to serve these buses. These buses have different maintenance needs. They have extensive power needs that obviously our garages, which were built in an era of diesel buses, are not currently equipped. So there's a whole bunch of interlocking steps. That said, we're committed to, we bought our last diesel-only bus. There's clearly a technology wave coming. We're just waiting to see what is the right fit for the MBTA.
And turning to commuter rail, what about electrifying that service?
Right now, we're in the middle, and in fact, on Monday, they will present another round of scenarios for what we call the Commuter Rail Vision Study, where we're taking a look at a bunch of different options for commuter rail. There's a significant constituency that's pushing regional rail, significant constituency for urban rail. And electrification is one of the things that's analyzed in this vision. And also different vehicle types. Right now we use kind of the locomotive and coach, multiple coach consist. There's another technology, the EMU, DMU technology, which is more, if you think of almost like a self-propelled subway car on a commuter rail line. So we're looking at all of that, trying to figure out what is the best choice. That's something that will be part of is already part of a public process. I would note that it is, none of this is free. Any one of these scenarios has price tags in the billions and tens of billions of dollars. So it's really this is a big decision. This is not a kind of discretionary one-off.
Certainly. So where is that money going to come from? All of these projects, and the T needs more money. There's been $8 billion, as we know, committed for 5 years. What about beyond that, and what about some of these other needs?
I think that the commuter rail one is difficult to answer because we don't really have an idea of sort of how much is needed, because we haven't picked a scenario and we don't know the length of time in terms of implementation. In terms of the next 5 years, we're actually in the position of, we have identified funding for the MBTA's capital plan for the next 5 years, and in fact, we are, right now we have $9.4 billion identified. We believe we can do at least $8.2 billion of projects. However, I have challenged the team to spend up to that $9.4 billion mark. We are in the position of having the funding in place for the next 5 years to get the work done that we need to. Our challenge is, how do you sequence, manage, procure, and execute on that work, all while continuing to run a system that carries 1.2 million people per day?
You may have the money. Do you have the human resources and talent to do it? Or might you have to go outside?
We are aggressively adding to the T's workforce that helps us to execute on the MBTA's capital program. Last year was the first year, I believe, in 4 years that the MBTA actually hired above its rate of attrition. We plan to hire 950 people next year. We'll have 500 people leave the organization, so that's a net increase of 450 people. Many of those people are going to be helping us get the capital program done faster. This is part of a request we've made to the legislature for $50 million in funding for what we're calling the Flex Force, which is intended to allow us to scale up in how we execute capital projects.
From Twitter, will we ever have a normal day of service?
I am obviously hopeful that we have that. I think we have days where we face challenges, and we have days, frankly, where it's relatively quiet. I think everyone's experience of the MBTA is their last commute, and if that was disrupted in some way, obviously we regret that, but it is something that everyone at the T is working on.
Jordan on Facebook says, what's been your greatest accomplishment as GM of the MBTA? And you've been on duty for, what, 9 months now? So.
9 months. I think greatest accomplishment may be a bit premature. I'm proud of the effort that has been made across the organization to not only run those 1.2 million trips per day, but also significantly ramp up the investment that we are making in the system. For the first time in the T's history last fiscal year, so the first half of this calendar year, the T spent over $1 billion on capital. We intend in the next fiscal year to spend significantly more than that, over $1.4 billion. So we are making huge strides in terms of the level of investment in the system.
Looking ahead to 2020, what are your priorities for improvement?
My priorities at the T would be, first of all, to improve and strengthen the level of safety and safety culture at the MBTA. I want to continue to invest in human capital, so that's helping the current employees we have improve, but also bringing additional talent to the organization. I want to deliver on the capital plan and aggressively invest in improving the safety and reliability of the system. I do want to push continued performance improvement, even setting aside the level of capital that's invested, taking the resources we currently have and improving. And lastly, continuing the fiscal discipline that allows the T, when we do spend additional money or we do invest, we are investing in additional service and not just having costs increase at an unsustainable rate.
I know one of the priorities you have mentioned in the past is communication with customers. Tell us about that. How are you trying to improve that?
We are attempting to communicate, I think, more clearly with customers and through multiple channels. We are using not only the hard assets we have, for instance, communicating through placards in stations, advertising space on vehicles, but also using social media. Also, we're going to launch a series of videos where we explain things like the diversions. We're really working to sort of operate in the communication channels that people use and do it in a way that that is meaningful to them. I think we're also trying to say more and be clearer with customers. I think in the past, the MBTA would have said, the Green Line is not running from this date to this date, full stop. We're trying to say the Green Line is not running, it's for these reasons. We're doing this work, we're showing you the work and saying this work will result in some type of improvement to service.
We have Bob from Boston says, will there ever be bathrooms at T stations?
That's a good question. There are, I'm not aware of what the blanket policy is. We do have bathrooms at certain stations. For instance, the new Wollaston station has bathrooms. Back Bay station has accessible bathrooms. I don't know offhand if we kind of have a blanket policy that explains where we do and where we don't.
Okay. So, Matt on Twitter says, can the MBTA explore weekend and weeknight service with the new Orange Line train sets soon? I don't know if that's additional service he's talking about. Or?
I think there are times when we have not run the Orange Line cars over the weekends because we're doing work on the vehicles, or we're taking. I think one of the things that's interesting about the new vehicles is, we're jumping 30 years of technology here, so we are getting so much data from these new vehicles, which have sensors and the ability to, sort of show where there are potential faults all over the place. So part of the process is we take time to understand what are the faults that we're learning about, and either figuring out whether they're real or whether there needs to be some adjustment, making sure that the vehicles are in good shape, and then getting them out there again. So right now we're using the weekends for part of that work. Obviously, at some point we'll get to the stage where we can run them more regularly.
And also, in terms of ridership, what can you tell us about the ridership? It has been declining, hasn't it, except on commuter rail?
Yes, I think there's been modest declines. Obviously, we saw kind of a precipitous decline that has come back on the Red Line over the summer. And again, as you'd expect, that is more acute on the southern end of the system. On the northern end, it's largely come back. We have seen some changes, some declines in riderships. I think we're still trying to sort through, is that an issue of substitution with things like Uber and Lyft? As you mentioned, commuter rail has seen a significant increase in ridership. And again, the numbers say from about 2012 to 2018, ridership's gone up by 16%. My lived experience, I happen to live in a place where I can take the bus and the Orange Line or take the commuter rail, so I take a mix of both. My lived experience is that the commuter rail is packed compared to what it was 5 or 10 years ago.
And I've heard lots of complaints about that. People are, paying for monthly passes, they can never get a seat. Particularly in Framingham, I heard that complaint. What about that? Will there be extra capacity?
We just passed at a recent Fiscal Management Control Board meeting a contract to get an additional 80 coaches on property. And again, this is not you can't go to the coach lot and buy a coach. It's probably going to take about 2 years before we start seeing those coaches, and that is moving. This may not land well with folks, but that is moving at light speed in the world of coach procurement. We are also thinking about, and this will be informed by the commuter rail vision process, so this may change, but we are at least putting the groundwork in place. If this is the pathway we decide to go where we want additional coaches, we are doing kind of a standard procurement of coaches, which is going to result in, if we choose to execute this contract, which again is an open issue, would result in coaches starting to come on property in 4 years. And that's sort of the standard procurement cycle.
We've talked about the Fiscal Control Management Control Board, which was, I guess, 4 to 5 years old right now. It's scheduled to go out of business next July. What do you think should happen?
You know, I think there's a general consensus that the MBTA needs a dedicated oversight body. I think there's, I haven't landed on this is what the next body should look like. Obviously, the Fiscal and Management Control Board, and this is a little self-serving because I was on it for a number of years. I think the Fiscal and Management Control Board has done a great job steadying the organization and putting it on a pathway to sustainability. There's a lot of discussion out there. How big should the board be? Should there be? I know there was a request for a dedicated seat. For instance, the city of Boston has made a request. Doubtless there will be other requests for that, and I think that is an emerging debate that we will have over time as to what it should look like. I do think the place where there is consensus is that it needs a standalone board dedicated to just overseeing the T.
We have a question for former Transportation Secretary Jim Aloisi, who asks, along with the modest fare increases every couple of years, what about an increase in the gas tax to help fund transportation?
That is something that I don't believe is necessary to fund the T. I think I'm going to stay very distinctly in my lane as general manager of the T and leave the broader discussion about revenue and taxation to others.
And just one final question. Would it ever get to the point, if the effort to repair the T fails, that you would in fact resign your position? Do you feel that strongly about it?
Oh, I mean, I think if I didn't think I was being an effective steward of the T, I would offer my resignation. I think it's important to consider that we've had considerable turnover in leadership at the T. I hear it from the employees. I hear it from people who have observed the T for a long period of time. So it is my intention to be general manager for a long period of time. I think it's going to take dedicated, sustained effort to make sure that we take the T from the place where it is now to the place where we think it can be. So my intent is to be here for as long as the T will have me.
All right. Thank you very much, General Manager Stephen Poftak of the MBTA. I want to thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining us here on our inaugural Lunch Hour Live program dealing with transportation. And we want to thank all of you who've been watching on Facebook and Twitter as well. We want to remind you that these sessions will be happening every Wednesday at noon here from the Boston Public Library, and every first Wednesday of the month we'll be talking transportation. So a lot of these issues we'll be revisiting in the months ahead. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in.